We're now going to move on to Emelie Köhler. Emelie's from Sweden. She's working on supporting and raising awareness around detransition and desisting in Sweden. She's going to talk about her own experience, what she's learned from connecting other detransitioners, and what's inherently misogynistic with trans ideology. And I'll just say this, I was incredibly lucky to go to a workshop that Emelie ran in Sweden a couple of years ago at a feminist summer camp, and heard her give just an incredibly moving, interesting talk. So it's really brilliant to hear from you again, Emelie, and over to you.
I'm going to start by briefly telling my own story, and then I'll move on to talk a bit more about detransition and transgenderism. I grew up being just a tomboy, and I felt very different from all the other girls. So I guess it wasn't strange that I was thinking a lot about why I was different. And then when I was 19, I spoke to a friend, and she was already within the LGBT community. So she told me, well, Emelie, have you heard about gender identity? Did you know that we're all born with an inner gender, and it might be the case that yours isn't really aligned with your body? And that's something that made a lot of sense to me back then, because I, really couldn't relate to other women and girls, especially when it came to expression-wise. So I very quickly bought into that idea and started identifying. And to not make this story too long, this was a process that lasted over 3 years, where I just I didn't have dysphoria when I started identifying. It was something that developed over time as I more and more believed that I was actually born with a male inner gender. And also, I should mention, just taking these social steps, changing name and pronoun. I think that made social situations a lot more difficult. So that definitely contributed to my just overall well-being and mental health quite drastically declining during those years. So I was always very hesitant to start to medicalize my body. I did understand that this is a big thing to do, and it's gonna impact my health. But in the end, I was doing so bad, and the only answer I could get from the situation I was in, with the dysphoria and me being very convinced that there was some male sort of inner gender, well, that was that this is something I need to do, because it was hopefully gonna make my life a bit easier. So I went through the whole process of getting a diagnosis, and I moved on to get double mastectomy, and then I started on the hormone treatment, testosterone. And this is actually, well, I guess it is a bit of a coincidence. I don't know really, but this is where I started to get critical as well. And it wasn't quiet that I didn't question my inner gender at first. It was that especially I got in touch with other trans person who had lived transitioned for some time. And that was in contrast to my other friends who were, well, most of my friends were also in the beginning of the process. But the people I met, they could give me a more realistic picture of what exactly to expect from transitioning. And they would just say a lot of things that that is not very much spoken about, like ranging from different health issues to many people ending up feeling alone despite having to transition to the gender that they identify with. And some of them were actually missing female spaces and having that experience acknowledged. And I should add that these people that I met, they actually weren't doing well at all. So I got assistance, and I actually moved on to look up studies, because until then I just assumed that, well, this is a treatment that is proven to work, I guess. But what I found when I started to look into the long-term follow-ups and studies that doesn't have too many dropouts, is that, well, it's actually not possible to say that this is like, yeah, this probably has, it seems to decrease the dysphoria that you experience, but you cannot expect your mental health to get better. And from my point of view, my mental health was very bad because I had dysphoria. So it didn't make any sense to me. And also what the studies could show was that the suicide rates were alarmingly high after transition. So at that point, I can say that I was in huge distress because I didn't have the courage to continue with the hormones. I dropped them. But I was still very convinced that there is a male on the inside. So what am I going to do with that situation? But what happened after that was that well, I guess during that time, speaking over a year or so, I started to question things in a way that I hadn't quite done before that. And I came eventually across a video by a detransition woman who, well, I guess I should mention that I, first of all, didn't believe in like detransitioning. I thought that might be something happening if there was something wrong with if you had medical issues or if you were pressured to it in some way. But this woman, she just, I mean, in contrast to me, she had actually lived transition for some time. So she were saying things that, well, just really breaking down the whole idea of gender identity. Like how can you explain being born in the wrong body? And why don't we talk about all these gender stereotypes and norms? And what is it actually to be a woman? It's not going to lead us anywhere good if we define it as anything other than just biology. So that was really the key for me. And when I mean, I had dropped the hormones sometime before, but that's the day when I took back about myself. And so that's briefly my story. And to move on to like where I am today, I guess, is that, so this is 4 years back now. And since then I've been, well, trying to raise a voice around this. And well, I have this website, and I've also contributed in some media coverage around it. And I guess some people wonder, like, why would you're just one person who has regretted all of this? Why would you make such a big deal out of it? But the thing here is really, and I think many of you have probably already read or seen or heard other detrans stories, but I don't relate very much to the word regretter, because at that time, with the options I had, with that like framework of, I mean, I wasn't questioning whether that trans feeling was there or not, but I think it's very clear that I was introduced to an idea. That's when my dysphoria developed. I was doing worse until I saw no other options than transitioning. And then what resolved the situation for me was to just criticize the very core of this, and that's the idea of being born in the wrong body or having anything like an inner gender. Yeah, so I mean, this is that's the wrong picture that people have. I would rather call us dissidents or well, what do you say? You know what I mean? And it's controversial, but I think it's really a key to all of this. And what people don't really see with this, because I mean, the way that people talk about this is that, like, they don't understand how serious this, well, the whole, it doesn't sound too bad. Like, what's the harm in letting people having inner genders? It's really promoted as something liberating and finding your true self. And I hear some people trying to make feminist statements about it. But if you break this down and really look into what it does to people, I think, my opinion, it's they say be your true self by finding this feeling and identification. But what I did during these years was really starting to disassociate from my body. And they say this has nothing to do with gender norms. Like, even people get offended when you even touch that subject, relating, like, if you relate it to trans. But there I also feel like you can go to any detransitioner or trans person and ask them about how it was to grow up as a gender non-conforming person. And I think most people would say that it was difficult. Like, some of us were bullied for it. Some of us had nasty things said to us. Some of us weren't treated very well for it, because we were breaking the norms for our gender. And they also say that it has nothing to do with stereotypes. And that's just, well, what is identifying? What is it that you identify with? What I didn't like to think about myself was comparing myself to a very, like, stereotypical picture of a woman in that society provides us with lots of makeup and stuff. That's what I wanted to get away from. And that's a stereotype. And I identified with the male stereotype. So there are just lots of things that you can break down here that really isn't feminist, and are actually prohibiting us from talking about really important stuff, like the gender norms that we want to change. And it's also just, it's so self-centered. Like, okay, so you feel bad for being gender non-conforming. It has nothing to do with what the world is like. It's just this feeling that you were born with, and it may lead to you having to change your body. But yay, it's gonna turn out well or something. So that's what makes me really angry, frustrated when with my experience and just thinking about how much it has hurt me, and to see this ideology coming wrapped up in like with rainbows and unicorns, and even presented to children. Like, I mean, I guess that's where I feel very strongly that it wasn't easy to detransition. I mean, I actually felt like I had to leave the whole community that I had, and socially it was very stressful. And I know I could do it because I was an adult and I had the capability to think more critically. But I'm not sure what would have happened if I was a lot younger. And I do believe that the only reason that it started for me when I was 19 is because that's when it was introduced to me. But if I was 12 years old, I think it could just as well have started at that age, and it would have been more difficult to break away from it. Because when I think about all these things that I broke down with the ideology, some of these things are, like, I think, ridiculously apparent in one way, that I can't believe that most people, like people supporting this transgenderism and transitioning young people, I can't believe that they are all buying into it fully, that there really is such thing as born in the wrong body, and it has nothing to do with stereotypes and gender norms and stuff. But I think we have a big issue when it comes to the idea of what transitioning can lead to. I think we're still very influenced by all the success stories that you can find out there, because there is usually a very big focus on, well, what I usually say is like you have this honeymoon phase. Like I think most people, and I think even studies shows this, that most people are doing better the first couple of years, but then you have the long-term not doing very well long-term, and then you have the health issues, and then some people may think more critically about it, and that may lead up to wishing that there would have been other alternatives. And here is where I think the whole group of detransitioners comes into the picture as well. I mean, we've seen a quite insane increase. I think it's enough to go back to like 2016, and you just wouldn't find much on the internet if you Googled. Today we have like this Reddit subgroup where you have almost 25,000 members. And I myself, I've also noticed that I didn't get in touch with very many 4 years ago, but now I do get in touch with a lot of people. And it's, you know, some people say, well, if this isn't working, if this isn't like saving people's lives, then shouldn't we get to a point where we see all transgender people detransitioning? And this is what I really want to get out there, that I don't think we're gonna reach that point, and it may very well be that there are some people transitioning that feels true that it has benefited to them. But what we do need to recognize is that it is incredibly difficult to detransition. It's many people take a long time just thinking over the decision, and then finding strategies around how to handle it socially. And also we can talk about the irreversible things that you just can't fix if you go back. So to me, I can't interpret the group of detransitioners that we see now in any other way that it is actually the tip of the iceberg. So that's what needs to be recognized, to understand that transitioning isn't helping the big group. It's causing more problems than it solves. And I think
Emelie, I'm going to have to get you to stop now if you want to say one more thing, but then
I'm good. That was my finishing point. And just to say that if we can reach out with that message, and then I think it will be quite easy to break down the ideology, because it doesn't make sense in so many ways.